Hey everyone, today we're going to dive into my world, the world of Leonardo da Vinci. Yes, it's me, talking to you from across centuries. You've probably seen my paintings, maybe even heard I dabbled in flying machines and dissected a few cadavers along the way. But I want to talk about something deeper, the mindset that kept me moving. Today, I'll start with my first and most important secret, curiosity without limits. So before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to my channel to support me making more great videos. Also, before we get rolling, check your surroundings, wherever you are right now, whether it's morning in your kitchen, afternoon in a busy cafe, or midnight under your blanket with headphones. This story works best when you imagine you're right there with me, walking the streets of Renaissance Florence. Now, let's listen to my compelling story in this video. I was born in Vinci, a small Tuscan village. Back then, the world was much quieter. No cars, no internet, not even street lamps. But my mind? Oh, it was noisy. Every little thing made me ask, why? Why does water swirl differently when it hits a rock? Why does a bird's wing curve just so? Why does a shadow have a soft edge on one side but a hard edge on the other? If you think curiosity is just about being interested, you're missing the real magic. For me, curiosity wasn't a hobby, it was oxygen. I didn't just want answers, I wanted all the answers. And I didn't care if people thought I was strange for spending an hour staring at ripples in a pond. One day, when I was maybe 12, I sat in a meadow sketching grass. Not the flowers, not the butterflies, just grass. A passing farmer laughed and asked, "What's so special about weeds?" I told him, "If you look closely enough, there are no weeds, only wonders you don't yet understand." He didn't get it, but I didn't need him to. The truth is, curiosity has a cost. In my time, it made me an oddity. People wanted quick, practical answers: how to make more wool, how to build a stronger wall. I wanted to know what the moon was made of. I wanted to know why we dream. That kind of curiosity doesn't give you instant rewards, but it plants seeds. And here's where you come in. Because in your century, you have infinite information at your fingertips. But if you only ask questions you already know how to Google, you'll never get to the good stuff. My advice? Ask bigger questions than you can answer right now. Let the mystery hang there and see where it takes you. When I moved to Florence as an apprentice, my curiosity exploded. I'd spend half a day in the studio, then sneak out to the market just to watch how merchants weighed fruit or how fabric sellers folded cloth. Why? Because every motion, every tool, every sound could teach me something new. I wasn't looking for a single skill. I was building a library in my mind. If you want to train your own curiosity, start by treating everything like it might be connected. That's the secret I learned early. No subject exists in isolation. The swirl of water in a stream can teach you about the curl of hair. The anatomy of a horse can help you design a better bridge. Sometimes, curiosity is about patience. I once spent 2 whole days observing how light moves across a wall as the sun travels. My friends thought I was wasting time. But years later, when I painted The Last Supper, that observation let me control light in a way they couldn't match. You see, curiosity is a long game. I should warn you, being endlessly curious will sometimes make people impatient with you. They'll say you're distracted, unfocused. They'll ask why you can't just stick to one thing. But the greatest treasures I found came from wandering into new subjects without worrying about where they'd lead. One example, I was sketching a mechanical device when I noticed the shape of the gears reminded me of sunflower seeds. That random link made me study plant spirals, which led me to mathematical patterns that I later used in architecture. If I'd stuck to my main project, I would have missed it entirely. Here's something you can do today. Pick an object near you. A pen, a cup, a shoelace. Now ask yourself 5 questions about it you've never asked before. How was it made? Who first invented it? How would it work in zero gravity? What would happen if it were twice its size? If it could talk, what story would it tell? This little exercise can turn your brain into a playground. In my notebooks, I didn't separate important questions from silly ones. To me, a question about the flight of a bird was as valuable as a question about the nature of the soul. And often, it was the so-called small question that unlocked something big. I'll tell you one last story from my early days. I once followed a lizard for nearly an hour, just to see where it lived. I ended up discovering a hollow in a rock filled with tiny, delicate fossils. That day, I learned not only about lizards, but also about the history of the Earth itself. All because I refused to stop at the obvious. So remember, curiosity without limits isn't just about collecting facts. It's about letting your mind roam free, connecting dots no one else sees, and trusting that even the strangest questions might lead you to something extraordinary. When you walk out your door tomorrow, I want you to try one thing. Pretend you've never seen your own neighborhood before. Look at it like a detective at a crime scene. Notice the cracks in the pavement, the patterns in the clouds, the sound of the wind between buildings. That's where creative thinking starts, not in genius, but in paying attention. Because here's the truth I've carried through centuries. Curiosity is the spark. Without it, even the greatest mind runs cold. But with it, every day becomes an adventure. And trust me, you never know where that adventure will take you. When people think of me, they often picture the Mona Lisa, her mysterious smile, or perhaps the Last Supper spread across a convent wall. But what they might miss is that these works weren't just art, they were experiments. I didn't paint the Mona Lisa simply to capture her face. I painted her to test my theories about light, human anatomy, and the way emotions shape our features. That's because for me, art and science were never separate worlds. They were one continuous conversation. I learned early that if you only stick to one way of thinking, you limit yourself. The artists I trained with were brilliant at making beautiful images, but they rarely asked why a shadow behaved a certain way. The engineers I met could design strong bridges, but they never stopped to notice the elegance of a flower. I thought, why choose? Why not have both? When I was working on my anatomy studies, I didn't do it just to draw muscles more accurately. I wanted to know how the body functioned, how bones acted as levers, how muscles pulled in patterns, how tendons worked like ropes and pulleys. That knowledge didn't just make me a better anatomist, it made me a better painter, sculptor, and inventor. My Vitruvian Man isn't just a pretty sketch, it's a scientific diagram in disguise. You might think of creativity like a spice rack. Most people pick one or two flavors and stick with them. I dumped the whole spice rack into the pot. Painting fed my understanding of geometry. Geometry taught me about perspective. Perspective helped me design machines. Those machines gave me insight into motion, which brought me back to painting. Everything fed everything else. One of my favorite memories is sketching a flying machine. The idea came while I was drawing birds for fun, but my mind kept drifting toward engineering. I thought, what if I applied the mechanics of a bird's wing to a human-made device? Soon, my sketchbook was filled with both feather studies and gear diagrams. At the time, people thought I was strange for putting science into art, but to me, there was no line between them. You can do the same in your own work, no matter your field. Maybe you're a programmer. Study music and see how rhythm affects the way you write code. Maybe you're a chef. Look into chemistry and understand why certain flavors blend. Creativity explodes when you mix tools from different toolboxes. Now here's a secret. Blending art and science isn't just about taking ideas from two fields. It's about letting them argue in your head. Sometimes my artist brain wanted things to be beautiful, while my engineer brain wanted them to be functional. That tension made the work stronger. For the Last Supper, I wanted to capture deep emotion in the faces, but I also needed precise geometry to draw the viewer's eyes toward Christ at the center. The solution came from listening to both voices and letting them wrestle until they agreed. I'll admit, it wasn't always easy. My flying machine never actually flew, at least not in my lifetime. But the failure didn't bother me as much as you might think, because the process of merging observation, imagination, and mathematics had already taught me more than success would have. And who knows? Perhaps my sketches planted seeds that sprouted centuries later in real aircraft design. I want you to try something. Pick two completely unrelated skills or hobbies you have. Now, ask yourself how they might work together. Could your love for photography influence the way you structure a business presentation? Could your knowledge of gardening help you plan a software workflow? The more ridiculous the pairing sounds, the better. That's where surprises live. In Florence, I once combined my love for painting with hydraulics. Strange, I know. I was asked to design a set for a theatrical production. Instead of a flat backdrop, I built moving scenery powered by water. The audience gasped when a mountain opened to reveal a glittering palace. Was it art? Was it engineering? I didn't care. It was magic. And it worked because I refused to separate beauty from mechanics. Blending art and science also sharpens problem solving. When I was working for the Duke of Milan, he asked me to design fortifications. I didn't just think about walls and moats. I studied the patterns of seashells to create curved surfaces that could deflect cannonballs. Nature was my greatest teacher because it already combined form and function flawlessly. I believe your century needs this mindset more than ever. Too many people build things without asking if they're beautiful, and too many make beautiful things without asking if they work. The real breakthroughs happen where those two questions meet. Remember, art without science can be shallow, and science without art can be soulless. Together, they create something that lasts. That's why my notebooks are filled with sketches of flowers alongside diagrams of gears, and why my paintings hide mathematical grids beneath layers of oil paint. Next time you're stuck on a problem, ask yourself, how would an artist solve this? Then, how would a scientist solve it? Somewhere in between those two answers is the solution you're looking for. And when you find it, you'll understand what I've known all my life. Creativity isn't about choosing one path. It's about weaving many paths into one. Because in the end, the world doesn't reward you for fitting neatly into a box. It rewards you for building your own box, painting it beautifully, and making sure it doesn't fall apart when you stand on it. I'll tell you something most people overlook. It's not enough to look, you have to see. Anyone can glance at a tree, but can you see the exact angle where the branch meets the trunk? Can you notice how the shadow shifts when the wind moves the leaves? That's the difference between walking through life half asleep and truly engaging with the world. My greatest advantage wasn't that I was smarter than others. It was that I trained myself to see what others missed. When I was a boy in Vinci, I would spend hours following ants, not because I had nothing better to do, but because their tiny movements revealed patterns, how they avoided obstacles, how they seemed to communicate without words. That same habit of observation later helped me design machines. A good hinge, after all, works a lot like an insect's joint. In Florence, while other apprentices copied their master's drawings, I would sneak into the streets and markets to watch people's faces when they bargained, lied, or laughed. Those moments became the emotional foundation for my paintings. You can't paint a convincing smile if you haven't seen one slowly form across a face in real life. Seeing what others miss starts with slowing down. Your century moves fast, faster than I can imagine. But if you never pause, your eyes will slide over the details. Once, I stood on a bridge for nearly an hour, watching the river's surface. At first, it looked random, but over time, I began to notice repeating shapes, small vortices forming, merging, and vanishing. That's when I realized nature works in patterns. And if you learn to see those patterns, you can predict, design, and create better. One of my favorite tricks was to look at the same thing from different angles, literally and figuratively. If I studied a flower from above, I'd also crouch down to see it from underneath. If I considered a problem as a painter, I'd then approach it as an engineer. Changing your perspective is like adding more lenses to your vision. It sharpens the image. I also kept what you might call observation games. For example, I would glance quickly at a scene, close my eyes, and try to recall every detail. The color of a merchant's robe, the number of steps at a doorway, the way a dog's ears tilted. At first, I'd miss half of it, but over time, my mind became sharper, like a camera with better focus. You can train your own vision this way too. Here's a little exercise for you. Next time you're in a familiar place, pretend you're a spy who has to report every detail to your master. How many colors can you see in a shadow? How many different shapes appear in just one corner of the room? This isn't just about memory, it's about really noticing. Some of my most valuable insights came from catching what others ignored. Once, while studying anatomy, I noticed a faint, almost invisible tendon in a cadaver's hand. My peers overlooked it, thinking it unimportant, but I realized it played a key role in finger movement. That single observation changed how I painted hands forever. And you may have noticed, I loved painting hands. The same skill helped me in engineering. When examining a broken mechanism, I'd first notice not the large obvious cracks, but the tiny uneven wear on a gear's teeth. That told me more about why it failed than any grand inspection. The smallest details often carry the loudest truths. But seeing what others miss isn't just about physical objects, it's about ideas. While others were obsessed with the finished work, I would study the process. When a rival artist presented a painting, I'd imagine how he built it, layer by layer, decision by decision. Understanding how someone creates gives you insight far deeper than simply admiring what they created. I'll admit, this habit made me difficult company. People would speak, and I'd notice their breathing pattern, their hand movements, their choice of words, and I'd start imagining what it revealed about their state of mind. My friends accused me of being distracted, but I wasn't distracted. I was collecting data. Every person, every object, every sound was a lesson. You might wonder, doesn't this make life exhausting? Sometimes, yes, but it also makes life infinitely richer. It's like moving from a blurry old map to a detailed one with every street, building, and garden drawn in. And when you see clearly, you can create more deeply, solve problems faster, and connect ideas more powerfully. The key is to combine observation with curiosity. If you see a strange pattern on a wall, don't just think, that's interesting. Ask, why is it like that? What caused it? Could I use that effect in my own work? Observation without questioning is just collecting. Observation with questioning is creating. I once watched a candle burn for hours, not because I had nothing better to do, but because I wanted to see how the flame behaved in different drafts of air. That led me to think about airflow, which helped me design ventilation systems for buildings. From a candle to architecture, yes, that's how my brain worked. So if you want to think like me, don't just look, study. Don't just notice, connect. And don't be afraid to spend more time than seems necessary on something small. Those small things can open doors to worlds most people will never see. Because the truth is, genius isn't about inventing something no one has ever thought of. It's about seeing what's been in front of everyone all along and recognizing its value before anyone else does. If there's one thing people misunderstand about me, it's that they think my notebooks were just doodles and daydreams. No, my friend, they were my workshop. Every wild idea, every half-baked invention, every what-if started there and slowly took shape until it became something real. Creativity is wonderful, but without a method to turn it into reality, it's like having a ship without sails. My process was messy, beautifully messy, but it worked. First came the spark, an idea from something I'd seen, read, or dreamed. I never waited for the perfect inspiration. I caught the smallest glimmer and ran with it. If I saw a bird twist mid-flight, I'd sketch its wing in 3 different positions. If I imagined a new water pump, I'd scribble it down, even if I wasn't sure how it worked yet. The key was to capture it now, refine it later. Once the idea was on paper, I would break it apart. I'd ask myself, what problem am I really trying to solve? What principles are at work here? Where could this fail? Sometimes that meant drawing a device from 10 different angles, or painting a study of a hand over and over until I understood every bone and muscle beneath. I wasn't afraid to dissect an idea, literally, if it was anatomy, to understand it fully before moving on. Then came the prototypes. In your time, you might call them mock-ups or drafts. Mine could be as simple as a wooden model carved by hand or a small clay sculpture. The point was to move the idea from imagination to physical reality, even in a rough form. That's where the truth revealed itself. Things that looked perfect in a drawing sometimes collapsed under real-world forces. For example, I once designed a giant crossbow, massive, almost the size of a small house. On paper, it looked magnificent. But when I built a scaled model, I realized the tension in the bow would warp the frame. That discovery saved me months of wasted work and showed me how to reinforce the design. Here's the lesson for you. Don't be afraid to test before it's finished. Perfectionism kills more ideas than failure ever will. Build the ugly version first. Let it wobble, let it break, and then fix it. Another step I swore by was iteration. I didn't just make one draft, I made 20. You might think that's tedious, but each new version taught me something. My paintings often had countless underdrawings beneath the final layer. My machines went through dozens of adjustments before I was satisfied. Every small improvement stacked up until the work felt inevitable. like it had always existed and I'd simply uncovered it. I also used what I call parallel projects. If I was stuck on a design for a canal system, I'd switch to painting or sculpture for a while. That shift in focus wasn't procrastination, it was a reset button. Often, the solution I needed in one project came from the completely unrelated work I was doing on another. One of my favorite creations born from this process was a stage device that made actors appear to fly. It started as a study of bird wings, became a sketch for a flying machine, then transformed into a pulley system for theater. None of that was planned. It happened because I allowed ideas to evolve instead of forcing them to stay in their original form. I also recommend surrounding yourself with the right materials. My studio wasn't tidy, far from it, but it was full of tools, models, scraps, and half-finished works. Inspiration often came from something lying on my workbench. A broken gear might spark the idea for a new type of wheel. A discarded painting panel might become the test surface for a new pigment. Now, you might be thinking, but Leonardo, I'm not an inventor or a painter. It doesn't matter. Whatever you do, writing, business, cooking, you can use the same process. Capture every idea without judgment. Break it down. Build a rough version. Improve it again and again. Work on multiple things in parallel. Let cross-pollination happen. One last thing, record everything. My notebooks were my greatest treasure. They held thousands of sketches, notes, and questions. I didn't keep them because I had a perfect memory. I kept them because memory lies, but paper tells the truth. Even now, centuries later, those notes speak for me when I can't. Turning ideas into reality is not magic. It's discipline disguised as play. I made it feel like a game, but I was relentless. I wanted to see my thoughts take shape, to hold them in my hands. And I promise you this, if you can master the habit of moving from vision to creation, there's nothing you can't build. Because in the end, an idea trapped in your mind is just a dream. An idea made real, that's where you change the world. People often look at my paintings, my machines, my notebooks, and assume that everything I touched turned to gold. That's a pleasant myth, but it's far from the truth. What they don't see are the dozens of unfinished paintings, the inventions that never worked, the commissions I abandoned, and the experiments that ended in utter disaster. If I had been afraid of failure, none of my successes would have existed. Let me be blunt. Failure was my most honest teacher. When you succeed, it's tempting to celebrate and move on. But when you fail, you have to stop, examine, and learn. I learned more from my collapsing prototypes than from the ones that held together. I learned more from botched paintings than from the ones that made people weep. One of my most notorious failures was a mural called The Battle of Anghiari. I wanted to experiment with a new painting technique using wax to make the colors more vivid. It worked beautifully, until the heat in the hall caused the wax to melt and drip. Imagine weeks of work literally sliding down the wall. People called it a disaster. I called it a lesson in respecting materials. Then there was the time I designed a massive bronze horse statue for the Duke of Milan. Years of planning, clay models, and public anticipation all gone when the bronze meant for my statue was repurposed to make cannons for war. Did it sting? Absolutely. But instead of sulking, I poured my energy into other projects. The horse never stood in my lifetime, but centuries later, others built it from my designs. Failure delayed it. It didn't kill it. In my notebooks, I often scribbled questions to myself. Why didn't this work? What could be changed? I treated each failure like a puzzle, not a verdict. That mindset is your best weapon against discouragement. If you think of failure as the end, you'll stop. If you think of it as data, you'll keep going and get better. Sometimes, failure even became the doorway to something unexpected. My flying machines never took to the skies, but the studies I made of air and lift ended up helping me design better bridges and water systems. I aimed for one target and hit another, something I would have missed entirely if I'd given up after the first crash. Here's what I want you to remember. Every failure is a map pointing to what you don't yet know. If you're willing to follow that map, it will take you places success never will. You live in a time obsessed with perfection. People share only their polished results, hiding the years of mistakes behind them. Don't fall into that trap. Show your process. Let others see your rough drafts, your failed attempts, your experiments. Not only will you grow faster, but you'll inspire others to be braver with their own work. I also learned to treat failure with humor. If you can laugh at your mistakes, they lose their power to paralyze you. When my students pointed out a flaw in one of my designs, I'd joke, I left that there so you'd have something to improve upon. Was I covering my pride? Maybe. But I was also teaching them that imperfection is part of the game. And here's a truth I'll whisper to you. Some of my so called failures were simply unfinished work I lost interest in because something else fascinated me more. People might see that as a flaw, scattered focus, but to me, it was following the trail of my curiosity. Not every idea needs to be finished. Some are meant to lead you to the next, better thing. So if you take only one lesson from this section, let it be this. Don't just accept failure, embrace it. Look it in the eye, shake its hand, and say, thank you for the lesson. That attitude will carry you through storms that sink others. Because in the end, the difference between someone who dreams and someone who creates is simple. The creator is willing to fail over and over until the thing in their head exists in the world. I did it. You can too. Summary and conclusion. 300 words. Over the course of my life, I chased questions with no end, mixed beauty with logic, saw details others ignored, brought wild ideas into reality, and learned to welcome failure as an ally. My curiosity without limits kept my mind alive. Blending art and science gave my work depth and power. Keen observation revealed the hidden patterns of the world. Disciplined creation turned visions into tangible works. And a fearless embrace of failure kept me moving forward, even when the path twisted or broke beneath my feet. These principles aren't bound to my time in Renaissance Italy. They belong to anyone, anywhere, who wants to create and live fully. Whether you're a painter, engineer, teacher, entrepreneur, or something entirely new that hasn't yet been named, these lessons will serve you. Train yourself to ask better questions. Refuse to choose between beauty and function. Pay attention to the smallest details. Build your ideas, test them, and refine them. And when you stumble, see it as the next step, not the last one. In my life, I often felt like I was running out of time. So many ideas, too little lifespan to finish them all. But I learned that the value is not only in the masterpieces completed, it's in the pursuit itself. The sketches, the experiments, the failures, they all add up to a life well lived. So as you go back to your own world, remember, you don't have to be Leonardo da Vinci to think like Leonardo da Vinci. You just have to be curious, bold, observant, persistent, and willing to fail forward.